John Callahan had always been a man who preferred the quiet life. After years of serving in the military and working as a trainer for law enforcement agencies, he decided it was time to step away from the chaos of the world and find peace. That's how he ended up at Willow Creek Ranch, a sprawling piece of land nestled deep in the countryside. The ranch wasn't just a home, it was his sanctuary, a place where he could breathe freely without the constant noise and drama of city life. Willow Creek was beautiful, with rolling hills, tall trees, and wide-open spaces that stretched as far as the eye could see. John spent years transforming the property into something truly special. He built sturdy fences for his cattle and horses, planted rows of crops like corn and wheat, and installed solar panels to make sure the ranch was self-sufficient. It was hard work, but John loved every moment of it. Every sunrise over the fields felt like a gift, and every evening brought the kind of calm that only comes from knowing you've earned your rest. But while John enjoyed his solitude, trouble seemed to have other plans. Not too far from Willow Creek Ranch, there was a gated community filled with expensive houses and manicured lawns. This neighborhood belonged to an organization called the Homeowners Association, HOA, which prided itself on keeping everything neat, tidy, and modern. At first, John and the HOA coexisted peacefully. His ranch was miles away from their properties, so they rarely crossed paths. But over time, things started to change. The complaints began small, just whispers at die. First, someone said the sound of John's tractor disturbed their morning coffee. Another claimed the dust kicked up by his horses made their car dirty. Then came accusations about the smell of manure wafting through the air, though John knew full well that the wind direction rarely carried any odors toward their side. These grievances might have seemed trivial to most people, but the HOA took them very seriously. They sent letters to John, politely asking him to address these concerns. At first, John tried to be understanding. He adjusted his schedule to minimize noise during early mornings and evenings. He even planted extra trees along the edges of his property to act as natural barriers against dust. But no matter what he did, the complaints kept coming. What started as polite requests soon turned into demands and then outright threats. The HOA accused him of violating their rules, though John couldn't figure out which ones he'd supposedly broken. He owned the land outright, paid his taxes, and followed all local regulations. There was nothing illegal about running a ranch. Despite the growing tension, John refused to let anger get the better of him. He reminded himself that this was his home, and he wasn't going to give it up because of some grumpy neighbors. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that the situation was spiraling out of control. The HOA board held meetings behind closed doors, whispering among themselves whenever John's name came up. Rumors spread that they wanted him gone, but John didn't know why. Was it really about noise and dust? Or was there something else driving their hostility? One day, John received a letter that chilled him to the bone. It looked official, complete with stamps and signatures claiming that he owed thousands of dollars in unpaid dues to the HOA. The letter stated that if he didn't pay immediately, his ownership of the ranch would be revoked, and he'd be evicted from the property. John stared at the paper in disbelief. He had never joined the HOA, nor had he ever agreed to pay them anything. How could they claim he owed money? And more importantly, how could they threaten to take away land that legally belonged to him? John knew enough about legal matters to recognize that this was nonsense. He double-checked his paperwork, consulted lawyers, and confirmed that the HOA had no jurisdiction over his property. Yet the letter left him uneasy. Something about it felt wrong, not just legally, but morally. Who were these people to try and bully him out of his own home? And what would they do next? As days turned into weeks, John kept a close watch on his surroundings. He noticed unfamiliar cars driving slowly past his ranch late at night. Strangers lingered near his fence line, pretending to admire the view but clearly scoping out the place. Each sighting made his stomach tighten. He began locking his gates more securely and keeping his shotgun close, not because he expected trouble, but because he wanted to be prepared if it came. Little did John know, the worst was yet to come. The HOA wasn't content with letters and veiled threats. They had bigger plans, plans that would test John's patience, courage, and skills in ways he couldn't imagine. For now, though, all he could do was wait and wonder, when would they strike next? And how far were they willing to go to drive him out of the only home he'd ever truly loved? Though John had faced danger before during his military career, this situation felt different. Back then, the enemy was clear-cut, soldiers on the battlefield following orders dictated by war. Here the battle lines were blurry, drawn by greed and entitlement rather than ideology. John couldn't help but feel like he was fighting ghosts, faceless, adversaries hiding behind bureaucracy and false authority. But one thing was certain, John Callahan wasn't the type to back down, no matter how daunting the odds. If the HOA thought they could scare him off his land, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The morning air was crisp and cool, the kind that made you feel alive if you were lucky enough to wake up early enough to enjoy it. John Callahan had always been an early riser. On this particular day, he stepped out onto his porch with a steaming cup of coffee in hand, watching the sun peek over the horizon. The ranch was quiet just the way he liked it. His horses grazed lazily in the distance, and the wind carried the faint scent of fresh hay. It was peaceful. Too peaceful, perhaps. As John sipped his coffee, he noticed something unusual, a line of unmarked cars speeding down the dirt road leading to his property. They weren't slowing down as they approached his driveway. Instead, they screeched to a halt right outside his gate. Dust clouds billowed into the air as doors slammed shut, and men dressed in tactical gear spilled out of the vehicles. Their movements were hurried, almost frantic, but there was something off about them, something John couldn't quite put his finger on yet. The men didn't bother knocking or announcing themselves politely. Instead, they stormed toward the house, shouting orders and waving what looked like badges. "This is law enforcement," one of them barked, his voice loud and harsh against the stillness of the morning. "Come out with your hands where we can see them." John froze for a split second, his instincts kicking in immediately. He set his coffee mug down on the railing of the porch and raised his hands slowly, showing he wasn't armed. "What's going on here?" he asked calmly, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "Who are you?" "We're here to evict you," the leader of the group snapped, shoving a piece of paper toward John. "You've been served notice. This property is no longer yours." John took a step back, narrowing his eyes as he studied the document being thrust at him. Even from a distance, he could tell it was the same fake eviction notice he'd received weeks earlier, the one he'd already proven to be fraudulent. But these men weren't interested in explanations. They moved closer, their body language aggressive, their weapons prominently displayed. That's when John realized what felt so wrong about them. Their gear wasn't standard issue. The patches on their uniforms were mismatched and their badges looked cheap, almost like props. Real officers wouldn't behave this way, not without proper identification, not without following protocol. These men weren't cops. They were imposters. A surge of anger mixed with fear bubbled inside John, but he forced himself to stay calm. Panic wouldn't help him now. Over the years, John had trained countless law enforcement officers, teaching them how to handle high-pressure situations with precision and control. Now those lessons would come in handy, not just for himself but potentially to expose whoever had sent these men. "Hold on," John said firmly, taking another step back. "I need to see some real ID. You can't just show up here and claim authority without proving who you are." The leader hesitated for a fraction of a second, clearly caught off guard by John's composure. Most people would have cowered or panicked under such circumstances, but John stood tall, his posture confident and unwavering. The hesitation gave John the opening he needed. Before the man could react, John moved quickly, using techniques he'd drilled into his students countless times. With practiced efficiency, he disarmed two of the intruders, twisting their arms behind their backs and pinning them to the ground. Another tried to lunge at him, but John sidestepped effortlessly, sweeping the man's legs out from under him and sending him crashing to the dirt. Chaos erupted as the remaining men scrambled to regroup, but John was faster. Years of training and experience gave him an edge they couldn't match. Within moments, 3 of the imposters were incapacitated, lying helplessly on the ground while John stood over them, breathing hard but completely in control. The others backed away, unsure of what to do next. None of them had expected resistance, let alone someone who could fight back with such skill. Realizing he couldn't leave them loose to cause more trouble, John herded the men into his barn and locked the door securely. Then, without wasting another second, he grabbed his phone and dialed 911. "There's a situation at my ranch," he told the dispatcher, his voice calm but urgent. "Several men claiming to be law enforcement showed up attempting to forcibly remove me from my property. I believe they're impersonating officers." While he waited for the authorities to arrive, John kept a close eye on the barn. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing minute. When the real police finally pulled up to the scene, they found John standing calmly beside his porch, explaining the situation in detail. Officers approached the barn cautiously, drawing their weapons as they unlocked the door. Inside, they discovered the imposters, still dazed and disoriented from the encounter. It didn't take long for investigators to confirm what John already suspected. These men weren't real cops. They were hired actors, paid by the HOA to stage the eviction. Evidence collected from their vehicles included forged documents, fake badges, and even scripts detailing exactly what they were supposed to say during the operation. It was a carefully orchestrated plan designed to intimidate John into leaving his home. News of the incident spread quickly. Neighbors who had once complained about John's ranch began to realize the gravity of the situation. Many felt guilty for having supported the HOA's actions, even indirectly. Others were outraged, demanding answers and accountability. Reporters descended on Willow Creek Ranch, eager to hear John's side of the story. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust in his face, and questions flew from every direction. But John remained composed, speaking clearly and directly about what had happened. "This isn't just about me," he told the reporters. "It's about standing up to abuse of power. If they can do this to me, they can do it to anyone. We all deserve better than this." Word of the incident reached the local SWAT team, many of whom had trained under John during their careers. Outraged by the audacity of the HOA's scheme, they rallied around him, offering their support publicly and privately. Some even joked that the imposters had picked the wrong guy to mess with. After all, John hadn't just taught them how to handle weapons, he'd taught them how to think critically, act decisively, and protect innocent people from harm. As the investigation unfolded, it became clear that the HOA had gone far beyond simple harassment. Emails revealed that the board president had personally coordinated the operation, hiring a private security firm known for its questionable ethics. The goal was simple: scare John into leaving so they could seize his land and expand their gated community. But they hadn't counted on John's resourcefulness or his connections. In the days that followed, John found himself at the center of a media storm. Interviews, talk shows, and news segments highlighted his story, turning him into an unlikely hero. Yet despite the attention, John stayed grounded. He knew the fight wasn't over. The HOA might have been exposed, but they still held significant influence in the area. If justice was going to be served, it would require more than headlines. It would require action. For now, though, John allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Sitting on his porch once again, he watched the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. His ranch was safe, for now. And though the battle ahead promised to be difficult, John felt ready. He had faced tougher challenges before, both on the battlefield and in life. Whatever came next, he knew he wouldn't face it alone. The fallout from the fake eviction attempt hit the town like a storm. Everyone was talking about it. Neighbors, shopkeepers, even people who had never met John Callahan before. It wasn't just the shock of what had happened. It was the realization that something so brazen could happen in their quiet little corner of the world. The HOA's scheme was no longer a private matter between John and his neighbors. It had become a public scandal, one that demanded answers. Investigators worked tirelessly to piece together the full scope of the operation. Emails, bank records, and witness testimonies painted a damning picture. The HOA president, a man named Richard Langley, had orchestrated the entire plan. He'd hired a shady private security firm known for staging aggressive evictions when property disputes arose. These firms operated in legal gray areas, relying on intimidation rather than legitimacy to get results. For Langley, this seemed like the perfect solution. Hire actors posing as law enforcement officers, send them to John's ranch, and force him out without leaving a paper trail. What he hadn't counted on was John's military training, or his determination to fight back. As details emerged, outrage rippled through the community. People who had once complained about John's ranch now saw things differently. They realized how easily they could have been targeted next. If the HOA could fabricate an eviction notice and send armed imposters to someone's home, what would stop them from doing the same elsewhere? Trust in the organization crumbled overnight. But John didn't stop there. He knew exposing the truth was only part of the battle. To truly make a difference, he needed to educate others about how such schemes worked and how to protect themselves. That's when he came up with an idea, a demonstration unlike anything the town had ever seen. He called it Training Day Redux, a nod to the countless training sessions he'd led for SWAT teams and law enforcement agencies over the years. This time, though, his audience wouldn't be officers. It would be ordinary citizens, local officials, and members of the press. On the day of the event, Willow Creek Ranch buzzed with activity. Dozens of cars lined the driveway, and reporters set up cameras near the barn where the fake eviction had taken place. Attendees mingled nervously, unsure of what to expect. Some were curious, others skeptical, but all were eager to hear John's story firsthand. When John stepped forward to address the crowd, the chatter died down immediately. Dressed in simple jeans and a flannel shirt, he looked more like a farmer than a retired military instructor. But when he spoke, his voice carried authority. "Thank you for coming today," he began, his tone warm but serious. "What happened here wasn't just an attack on me. It was an attack on our rights as property owners and citizens. I want to show you how easy it is to fall victim to fraud like this, and how we can prevent it." With that, John launched into a step-by-step recreation of the fake eviction scenario. He started by explaining how the imposters had approached his house, pointing out subtle red flags that should have raised suspicions: the mismatched uniforms, the lack of proper insignias, the overly aggressive behavior. Then, using volunteers from the audience, he demonstrated common tactics used by fraudulent actors, such as flashing badges too quickly to be examined or refusing to provide clear identification. The highlight of the demonstration came when John showed how to physically defend oneself without escalating the situation unnecessarily. Drawing on techniques he'd taught SWAT teams, he walked attendees through basic self-defense moves designed to disarm and restrain an opponent safely. "You don't need brute strength to protect yourself," he explained. "You need awareness, quick thinking, and a few key skills." The crowd watched in awe as John effortlessly disarmed a volunteer wielding a rubber training baton, turning the tables in seconds. Throughout the event, John emphasized the importance of staying calm under pressure. "Fear clouds your judgment," he said. "If you panic, you give the other side the advantage. Stay alert, ask questions, and trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is." The demonstration ended with a Q&A session, during which John fielded questions ranging from legal advice to personal safety tips. One attendee asked how to verify whether someone claiming to be law enforcement is legitimate. John smiled and pulled out a laminated card listing key identifiers, badge numbers, department patches, and official vehicles. "Always check credentials," he advised. "And if you're still unsure, call 911 directly. Don't use the phone number they give you." By the end of the day, the message was clear. Vigilance and knowledge are powerful tools against abuse of power. As attendees left Willow Creek Ranch, many thanked John personally, shaking his hand and promising to share what they'd learned with friends and family. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, capturing every detail for their stories. Within hours, footage of the event went viral online, sparking conversations far beyond the small town. Lawmakers took notice almost immediately. State representatives reached out to John, inviting him to testify at hearings focused on increasing oversight of HOAs and similar organizations. Legislators proposed bills aimed at preventing fraudulent evictions and holding offenders accountable. Community leaders praised John for turning a personal crisis into an opportunity to drive meaningful change. Meanwhile, the HOA found itself drowning in controversy. Membership plummeted as residents withdrew their support, and several board members resigned in disgrace. Richard Langley faced criminal charges for conspiracy and fraud, his reputation ruined. Yet despite mounting pressure, the HOA refused to apologize publicly, doubling down on its claim that John's ranch was a nuisance. Their defiance only fueled public anger, further isolating them from the community. For John, the attention was overwhelming but gratifying. People often asked why he hadn't moved away after everything that had happened. "This is my home," he replied simply. "I built it with my own hands, and I'm not going to let anyone take it from me. Not through lies, not through fear, and certainly not through violence." Still, John understood that fighting back wasn't just about protecting himself. It was about setting an example for others. By standing up to the HOA, he had shown that even the most powerful institutions could be held accountable. And by sharing his expertise, he had empowered others to do the same. In the weeks that followed, John received hundreds of messages from strangers thanking him for inspiring them to stand up against injustice. Some shared stories of their own battles with corrupt organizations. Others sought advice on handling disputes with landlords or local authorities. John responded to each one personally, offering encouragement and guidance whenever he could. Though he never sought fame, he embraced the role of mentor, knowing that his experience could help others navigate similar challenges. At the same time, John continued to focus on rebuilding his life at Willow Creek Ranch. The incident had taken a toll, both emotionally and financially, but he refused to let bitterness consume him. Instead, he channeled his energy into making the ranch stronger and more resilient than ever. He repaired fences damaged during the scuffle, replanted crops trampled by intruders, and installed additional security measures to ensure his property remained safe. Neighbors who had once dismissed John as a stubborn outsider now treated him with respect and admiration. Many apologized for their past complaints, acknowledging that they had underestimated him. Some even offered to help around the ranch, pitching in with repairs or lending equipment. Slowly but surely, John began to feel like part of the community. Again, a feeling he hadn't experienced since moving to the area. Looking back on everything that had happened, John couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed. What started as a quiet life on a remote ranch had turned into a whirlwind of chaos, courage, and ultimately, triumph. Through it all, he had stayed true to himself, relying on the values and skills he'd honed over a lifetime of service. Now, as he stood on his porch watching the sunset, John felt a deep sense of peace. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he knew he wasn't walking it alone. The days following Training Day Redux were a whirlwind for John Callahan. His demonstration had struck a chord with people far beyond the small town where Willow Creek Ranch was located. News outlets across the state, and even nationally, picked up the story, turning John into an unlikely symbol of resilience and justice. Emails, phone calls, and letters poured in from strangers who had faced similar battles with HOAs or other powerful entities. Some sought advice. Others simply wanted to thank him for shining a light on issues they'd struggled to articulate. But John wasn't content to rest on his laurels. He knew that exposing the HOA's scheme and teaching people how to spot fraud was just the beginning. The real challenge lay in ensuring that no one else would have to endure what he had gone through. That meant pushing for systemic change, changes that would protect property owners and hold organizations like the HOA accountable for their actions. John decided to take his fight to the next level. With the help of local lawmakers, he began advocating for stronger regulations governing homeowners associations. He attended town hall meetings, spoke at legislative hearings, and met with government officials to discuss ways to prevent abuses of power. His arguments were compelling. If unchecked, groups like the HOA could exploit loopholes in the law to bully ordinary citizens out of their homes. One of the key proposals John championed was the creation of an independent oversight board tasked with investigating complaints against HOAs. This board would include representatives from law enforcement, legal experts, and community advocates, ensuring a fair process for resolving disputes. Additionally, John pushed for stricter penalties for organizations caught engaging in fraudulent activities, such as hiring fake officers or forging documents. "It's not enough to expose wrongdoing," he told lawmakers during one hearing. "We need consequences severe enough to deter it from happening again." His efforts didn't go unnoticed. Lawmakers praised John for his dedication and insight, crediting him with sparking a much-needed conversation about accountability. Several bills inspired by his ideas were introduced in the state legislature, drawing bipartisan support. Community leaders rallied behind the proposed reforms, organizing petitions and campaigns to build public momentum. By the time the first round of votes took place, thousands of residents had signed on in favor of the measures. While John worked tirelessly to effect change at the policy level, he also continued mentoring those directly affected by similar schemes. People traveled from neighboring towns and counties to visit Willow Creek Ranch, seeking guidance on how to navigate disputes with their own HOAs. John welcomed them warmly, offering practical advice based on his experiences. He taught them how to document interactions with HOA representatives, file formal complaints, and seek legal assistance when necessary. For many, these conversations were life-changing. They left feeling empowered and equipped to stand up for themselves. John's influence extended beyond individual cases. Inspired by his example, several advocacy groups formed to support victims of HOA harassment. These organizations provided resources, legal aid, and emotional support to families struggling to defend their homes. One group, calling itself Neighbors United, held regular meetings at a local community center, inviting speakers like John to share their stories and strategies. Over time, these grassroots efforts gained traction, creating a network of informed and resilient citizens determined to protect their rights. Despite the progress being made, John remained vigilant. He knew that fighting corruption required constant effort. It wasn't something you won once and then forgot about. To stay ahead of potential threats, he upgraded the security systems at Willow Creek Ranch, installing cameras and motion sensors around the perimeter. He also maintained close ties with local law enforcement, sharing intelligence and updates whenever suspicious activity occurred in the area. Officers often stopped by the ranch to check on him, grateful for the training he'd provided over the years and eager to ensure his safety. Life at the ranch slowly returned to normal, or at least as close to normal as it could be after everything that had happened. John spent his mornings tending to his animals, repairing fences, and planting new crops. Afternoons were reserved for meetings, interviews, and planning sessions with lawmakers and activists. Evenings brought a sense of calm as he sat on his porch watching the sunset, reflecting on the day's events. One evening, as he sipped a cup of coffee, John received a call from an old friend, a former student who now served as captain of the local SWAT team. "Hey, John," the voice on the other end said cheerfully. "I heard about your latest victory. Congrats, man, you're making waves." John chuckled softly. "Just trying to keep things moving forward," he replied modestly. "How's the team doing?" "They're good," the captain said. "Actually, we've been talking about you lately. A lot of the guys think it's time we honored you properly, not just for what you did here, but for everything you've done for us over the years. They want to throw you a ceremony, maybe present you with a plaque or something." John hesitated, touched by the gesture but unsure if he deserved such recognition. "That's kind of you," he said finally. "But I don't need any awards. If anything, I hope people remember this as a lesson, not just about standing up to bullies, but about working together to make things better." The captain laughed. "Leave it to you to turn down an honor like that. But seriously, John, you've earned it. We'll figure something out soon." After hanging up, John leaned back in his chair, staring out at the fields bathed in golden light. He thought about all the people who had supported him along the way, the neighbors who apologized for doubting him, the reporters who amplified his message, the lawmakers who listened to his suggestions. He realized that while he had played a central role in exposing the HOA's scheme, the victory belonged to everyone who had stood beside him. As autumn approached, John noticed subtle changes in the landscape. Leaves turned vibrant shades of red and orange, and the air grew cooler. It was harvest season, a time of abundance and gratitude. John decided to mark the occasion by hosting a community gathering at the ranch. He invited neighbors, friends, and anyone else who had shown solidarity during the ordeal. Together they shared food, laughter, and stories under the wide-open sky. During the event, a young boy approached John shyly, clutching a handmade card. "Mr. Callahan?" he asked, holding it out. "My mom says you're a hero." John knelt down to meet the boy's gaze, smiling gently. "Thank you," he said, accepting the card. "But I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who stood up for what's right. And guess what? So are you. Everyone has the power to make a difference, no matter how big or small." The boy beamed, nodding eagerly before running off to rejoin his family. Watching him go, John felt a renewed sense of purpose. Yes, the battle against the HOA had been exhausting and fraught with challenges, but it had also reminded him of something important. The strength of a community united by fairness and integrity is unstoppable. In the weeks that followed, John continued balancing his roles as a rancher, advocate, and mentor. Though the scars of the past lingered, they served as reminders of how far he and those around him had come. The road ahead wouldn't always be smooth, but John faced it with unwavering resolve. After all, he had learned long ago that true peace didn't come from avoiding conflict. It came from confronting it head-on and emerging stronger on the other side. And so, life at Willow Creek Ranch carried on, shaped by resilience, compassion, and the enduring belief that justice, though hard-won, was worth every ounce of effort. The months rolled by, and the dust of the HOA scandal began to settle. For John Callahan, life at Willow Creek Ranch felt different. Not quieter exactly, but fuller. The once isolated ranch had transformed into a hub of activity, drawing visitors from all walks of life. Neighbors who had once complained about his horses or tractors now stopped by with fresh-baked pies or offers to help mend fences. Reporters occasionally called for updates on the ongoing legal battles against the HOA, but most days were filled with simpler pleasures: tending to crops, caring for animals, and watching the sun dip below the horizon in hues of orange and pink. Justice finally caught up with the HOA leadership. Richard Langley, the former president, was convicted of conspiracy and fraud after a lengthy trial that captivated the entire town. Evidence presented during the proceedings painted a damning picture of greed and corruption. Emails revealed how Langley had orchestrated not only the fake eviction attempt, but also other schemes targeting property owners deemed undesirable by the board. Several key members resigned in disgrace, while others faced lawsuits filed by angry residents seeking compensation for years of harassment. By the time the verdict was announced, the HOA had dissolved entirely, leaving behind nothing but a tarnished reputation. For many, this outcome was satisfying. But for John, it wasn't just about punishing those responsible. It was about ensuring that something positive emerged from the chaos. He continued working closely with lawmakers to pass legislation aimed at preventing similar abuses in the future. One landmark bill, known as the Property Owners Protection Act, established stricter guidelines for HOAs, including mandatory transparency in decision-making processes and penalties for unethical behavior. Another measure created an independent oversight committee tasked with investigating complaints against such organizations. These reforms became models for other states grappling with similar issues, earning John widespread recognition as a champion of property rights. Yet, despite the accolades, John remained humble. When reporters asked him about his role in sparking these changes, he shrugged modestly. "I didn't do anything special," he'd say. "I just refused to back down when someone tried to take what was mine. If there's one thing I hope people remember, it's that standing up for yourself isn't just about winning. It's about protecting everyone else who might be vulnerable." That philosophy guided John as he turned his attention toward giving back to the community. Inspired by the outpouring of support he'd received, he decided to reopen Willow Creek Ranch as a retreat center, a place where veterans, law enforcement, officers, and civilians could come together to learn valuable skills and share experiences. The idea came to him during one of his late-night reflections on the porch. He realized that the lessons he'd taught SWAT teams over the years, about resilience, critical thinking, and teamwork, could benefit a wider audience. Why not create a space where people could unplug from the stresses of modern life and reconnect with nature, all while gaining practical tools to navigate challenges? With the help of volunteers and donations from grateful neighbors, John transformed parts of the ranch into classrooms, workshops, and communal living areas. There was a large barn converted into a training facility, complete with equipment for self-defense drills and survival exercises. Nearby, a garden provided fresh produce for meals, emphasizing sustainability and self-reliance. Even the old stables found new purpose, housing therapy horses used in programs designed to help veterans cope with PTSD. The first group of participants arrived on a crisp autumn morning. They included retired soldiers struggling to adjust to civilian life, young officers eager to hone their skills, and everyday citizens looking to feel safer in an uncertain world. Over the course of several weeks, they learned everything from basic first aid to advanced conflict resolution techniques. But perhaps more importantly, they formed bonds with one another, sharing stories and finding common ground despite their diverse backgrounds. One participant, a single mother named Sarah, stood out to John. She had traveled from a neighboring state after hearing about the retreat through a local advocacy group. Her story resonated deeply with him. She'd been harassed by her own HOA for years, accused of violating rules she hadn't even known existed. Though she eventually won her case in court, the experience left her feeling isolated and distrustful of authority figures. At Willow Creek, however, Sarah discovered a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. By the end of the program, she was volunteering to lead workshops herself, teaching others how to advocate for themselves in difficult situations. Seeing transformations like Sarah's reinforced John's belief in the power of community. He often reminded participants that strength wasn't measured by individual victories, but by collective progress. "We're stronger when we stand together," he'd tell them during evening gatherings around the campfire. "No matter how tough things get, there's always someone willing to lend a hand if you're brave enough to ask." As word spread about the retreat center, demand grew rapidly. People came from across the country to attend sessions, drawn not only by the promise of learning new skills but also by the chance to meet the man who had inspired so many. Journalists profiled the program, highlighting its impact on both individuals and communities. Celebrities and politicians expressed interest in visiting, though John politely declined most requests, preferring to keep the focus on the participants rather than himself. Despite the influx of visitors, John made sure the ranch retained its soul. He still woke before dawn to tend to his animals, still walked the fields each afternoon to check on his crops. The land remained his sanctuary, a reminder of why he'd fought so hard to protect it. On quiet evenings, he'd sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, listening to the sounds of laughter and conversation drifting from the retreat center. It was a far cry from the solitude he'd once cherished, but he wouldn't trade it for anything. Looking back on everything that had happened, John couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed, and how much hadn't. The core values that had guided him throughout his life, integrity, perseverance, and compassion, remained unchanged. What had shifted was his understanding of their broader significance. Standing up to the HOA hadn't just been about defending his home. It had been about proving that ordinary people could hold powerful institutions accountable. Opening the retreat center hadn't just been about teaching skills. It had been about fostering connections and empowering others to face their own battles. One chilly winter evening, as snow blanketed the fields and the stars twinkled brightly overhead, John reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He thought about the early mornings spent sipping coffee on the porch, the tense moments confronting imposters, the countless hours spent advocating for reform. Each step had been challenging yet fulfilling in its own way. And now, surrounded by friends, neighbors, and strangers turned allies, he felt a profound sense of gratitude for the land beneath his feet. for the lessons he'd learned, and for the opportunity to make a difference. John knew the road ahead wouldn't always be easy. New challenges would arise, requiring vigilance and courage, but he also knew he wouldn't face them alone. Whether it was the participants at the retreat center, the lawmakers pushing for change, or the neighbors who had rallied around him, John had built a network of support strong enough to weather any storm. As he stepped inside to warm up by the fire, John paused for a moment, glancing back at the ranch bathed in moonlight. Willow Creek wasn't just a piece of property anymore. It was a symbol of resilience, justice, and hope. And as long as John Callahan drew breath, it would remain exactly that, a testament to the power of standing firm in the face of adversity and inspiring others to do the same.